Volvo is pushing hard toward a full electric future. By 2025, half of their vehicles in North America will at least be plug-in hybrids or full battery electric vehicles. By 2030, they want the vehicles to be zero emissions, and they want to be a completely net zero manufacturer when everything is taken into account by 2040. Those are some pretty aggressive goals, and outside of a startup electric car company, Volvo is arguably the most aggressive manufacturer when it comes towards pushing towards a reduced emission and zero emissions future. The next step in this push is the new 2022 Volvo C40. This is Volvo's first dedicated electric vehicle, so the C40 is only going to come as a battery electric, not as a plug-in hybrid, not as a full hybrid, not as a mild hybrid. This is obviously closely related to the XC40, but this is designed to be a little bit more style forward and show us sort of the styling directions that we can expect from Volvo as they release a barrage of full EVs coming in about a year or so. The C40 is likely showing us the styling direction of future Volvo electric vehicles. Rather than the grille insert with a prominent surround like we find in the XC40, they've gone for a smoother, cleaner look here. The latest Volvo logo there with a little bit of a sash on each side. Still some cooling grates going on here down at the bottom and then right there in the middle. We have full LED headlights, and these are the new Pixel LED headlights from Volvo. In Europe, they're going to do all the fun stuff that you can do in a modern Audi or BMW or Mercedes. Sadly, in the US, our lighting laws are still not adjusted quite right, but Volvo has said they could over-the-air update this if the lighting laws change. And it does appear that they are going to in the US, probably in about 18 months to 2 years. German luxury companies have been doing this for a while, but the C40 is Volvo's first 5-door coupe crossover. And there's a reason for that. This profile is more aerodynamic than the boxier XC40, and that's why this gets 3 more miles of range. The big change happens right about here, although this area is not exactly the same as the XC40 either, but the rear doors are definitely unique, the roofline is unique, and of course the hatch in the back. Charging still happens back here. There's a standard J1772 charging port and a CCS DC fast charge connector. 150 kW is the peak charge rate. The ground clearance drops from 8.3 inches in the XC40 down to 7 inches in the C40, as you'd expect in more of a coupe-like thing. And we have staggered tires, which is kind of an interesting twist. 255s in the back, 235s up front. They're both 20-inch wheels, and what look kind of like aero covers, that's actually not an aero cover. That's just part of the wheel itself. The coupe-like styling is really obvious from the rear, where we have a spoiler on top of the more sport-back sloped roof there, spoiler right there on top of the glass as well. Full LED tail lights back here with progressive amber LED turn signals, which is a really nice touch. We still have parking sensors down at the bottom, and because this is a coupe crossover, not a coupe, we definitely have lots of black body cladding all the way around. Buried somewhere down there under the hood, we have one of 2 electric motors. In this vehicle, they're identical. So rather than like some luxury vehicles where there's a more powerful motor in the back and a less powerful one up front, in this one, they're the same. Both are rated for 201 horsepower and 243 pound-feet of torque, giving you 402 horsepower total and 486 pound-feet of torque. That's enough to get this 0 to 60 in about 4.2 to 4.5 seconds. This is the fastest production Volvo that they have ever built. Now, the C40 and the XC40 and the Polestar 2, they're all built on Volvo's small car platform. This was designed from the ground up to accommodate a battery like this and be a full battery electric vehicle, but also to be a plug-in hybrid, a mild hybrid, and a regular gasoline vehicle, which is why we find a small storage area here. This is where Volvo puts the included dual voltage EVSE. This is a touch I really like. This is rated for 40 amps max on 240, so it's a little bit more powerful than the one they include with their plug-in hybrids, but still has a 15 volt 110 outlet. I love the fact that they come with this, so you don't have to buy an EVSE if you don't want to. Under here, we find a little bit more storage space. You can see this is where the can of Fix-A-Flat, tire inflator kit, etc. are here. This front trunk is bigger than you might imagine because that foam divider is in it. Volvo could also have logically made this cargo area a little bit larger if it didn't have this second sort of pizza box lid arrangement. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Driving the electric motors is a 78 kilowatt hour battery pack, also shared with the XC40 Recharge and the Polestar 2. That gives this a range of 226 miles, again 3 miles longer than the XC40. MPGe, that comes in at 87. I was a tiny bit surprised that the MPGe number didn't bump up for the new C40, and I'm not entirely clear why that is. In real-world driving, the C40 is likely to be a little bit more efficient than its numbers would otherwise appear. I noticed that both in the Polestar 2 and in the XC40, so Volvo is probably really conservative when they calculate their range and their MPGe numbers, and other manufacturers are more aggressive, they want a bigger number, and that is allowable under the EPA's testing formula. Helping out the range in colder climates, which would certainly not be where I am now down in Southern California, there is an onboard heat pump standard in this vehicle that will reduce electrical consumption in colder areas. That's something that we didn't see when the Polestar 2 launched, but we do have here in the C40 standard. Versus some of the competition, heat pumps are optional versus standard here, and heat pumps are not offered at all in something like the Ford Mustang Mach-E, which oddly enough is a competitor to the C40 because it's a style-forward sort of coupe crossover thing. This has a lot more ground clearance and obviously a luxury logo on the front, but you can actually get that Mustang Mach-E up to a higher price tag than this. Volvo is not billing the C40 as a rugged off-road capable crossover, but what intrigues me is that this is much more off-road capable than the average EV. That starts with more ground clearance than average. This is... Sorry for the break in continuity. I had a microphone go bad at exactly the wrong moment. What I mean to say in this shot, and I have to say this shot looked better in person than it kind of does here on camera, is that the C40 has 7 inches of ground clearance. It has rated approach, breakover, and departure angles of 20.1, 16.2, and 26.6 respectively. That is really, really decent for an electrified crossover. That's definitely better than the Mustang Mach-E, the Ioniq 5, the EV6, pretty much everything in this sort of mid-level category, whether we're talking about mainstream vehicles or luxury vehicles like the upcoming electric vehicle from the Genesis group. Really, if you want better angles than this, you're going to have to get the adaptive air suspension on the I-Pace, and you're going to get a slightly better set of angles, but it's not going to be a huge difference. Or you need to step all the way up into something like a Rivian or an F-150 Lightning, something like that, that would be more off-road capable. The only other electric competitor with more of an off-road focus than this is the Subaru Solterra and the related Toyota BZ4X. Those will give you slightly better angles and a little bit more ground clearance. Weighting depth in the C40, surprisingly, it does have a rating, 17.7 inches. Again, that's pretty generous compared to the vast majority of the competition. And in case you're wondering, yes, the vehicle does have an off-road mode. It's accessible via the infotainment system, and that's basically going to change the way the traction and stability control functions, and it's going to make the ABS system try to act sort of as a limited slip differential without reducing power too much. So rather than just letting one wheel hang out up in the air and just spin, it's going to try and brake that wheel a little bit to send power to where it's needed. According to Volvo's spec sheet, the C40 has a little bit more cargo room than the XC40. I'm asking for clarification on that because clearly we have a much more sloped opening here. Now the C40 is a little bit longer than the XC40, and I suspect that it's just based on the measurement standard. So below the headrests, this cargo area may be a little bit boxier, a little bit longer than the XC40, but it certainly is not as tall. We do, however, have a lot of the same practical touches here. There's a ski pass-through right back there. If I move the bag out of the way, we have a lift-up load floor. You can put it in one little detent right there, and then you can put shopping bags on those little hooks. This is also where we find the jack and a little storage area right there. No spare tire, however, just a jack. And under this floor, there is enough storage room where you can actually put this hard cargo cover completely under the load floor and then put stuff on the load floor. As you'd expect in a modern EV, the interior is very futuristic, and it has the thing that all EVs must have, a big glass roof that does not open. It does not go back there to the rear passengers' heads, however, so it doesn't affect rear seat headroom. We get high-adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests for the driver and front passenger, and lots of eco-friendly materials in here. This is Volvo's first completely leather-free model, so no leather here. This is an imitation leather product that sort of feels like a wetsuit. The middle of the seat is upholstered in a faux suede fabric that is also environmentally friendly. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, extending thigh cushion there. That's a manual one. And then we have a carpeted insert in the door, which is a really cool touch that we first saw in the XC40. This definitely feels more premium than a hard plastic would in that same position there, while also giving it, I guess, a little bit of a pop. The carpet in there matches the carpet on the floor and the carpeted floor mats. Moving back to the door, there's a slightly different trim here than we find in the XC40. The ambient lighting has also been tweaked a little bit, but the general styling in here is definitely XC40, as is the Google infotainment system that we are now going to be seeing on basically every Volvo product going forward. My only complaint about this is that it still does not give us Apple CarPlay. That has been promised for quite some time by Volvo and Polestar, and it just has not happened yet. This has the latest Google operating system. We have a few more apps than we first saw. In the XC40 Recharge, we have this range assistant there. We now have Sirius XM, but again, no CarPlay. The natural voice commands are done very well, and this has the Google mapping interface. I'll just go ahead and clear that out there so you can see what's going on here. Hey Google, navigate me to San Jose, California. The system accepts very natural voice commands. You can adjust the temperature, things like that as well. You can see navigation is all internet connected, so it's gone ahead and loaded that up. It has taken traffic into account, speed trap warnings there as well, and it will automatically add charging stops. You can see it favors Electrify America, which is definitely a good thing versus some of those slow charging stops. And it tells you what your battery percentage is going to be there at those 3 charging stops, and then what your battery percentage is going to be when you actually hit San Jose. Then down here at the bottom, it gives you a total drive time and the 476 miles of total distance there. The rest of the interior is largely the same as the regular XC40, with the exception of no on-off button here. I actually wish they had included one. The main reason is for situations where maybe you want to continue air conditioning passengers in the cabin or whatever. The way this vehicle works is you have to sit in the driver's seat, put your foot on the brake, double pull this shifter here or double push it forward for reverse. Then the vehicle will turn on and do what you want. If you hit the park button and then you lift your butt off the driver's seat, then the car turns itself off. And that's even if you've buckled the seat belt in behind you. Down here we have a Qi wireless charging mat, 2 USB inputs, 2 big cup holders there. Again, the park button there, but no auxiliary, expanded regen braking mode or anything like that. No paddle shifters, no toggles for extra regen there. We have a center console with a padded armrest, pretty decently sized storage cubby there, and a little removable trash can that's kind of a cool touch. The driver gets a full LCD instrument cluster, but the design does not change as much as we find in some modern Mercedes EVs. It has a moving map display there in the middle, but it doesn't change theme based on the drive mode. The steering wheel is a very similar design to Volvo's larger vehicles. We have the controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on the left, buttons for the infotainment system, and that multifunction display over here on the right, plastic airbag cover in the middle. The steering wheel looks like it's leather wrapped, but this is also wrapped in a non-leather product. The basic seat design is shared with the XC40, so we find a multi-way power driver's seat, power front passenger seat as well, with the identical range of motion here, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and a manual extending thigh cushion. There's a 2-position memory over there for the driver, and we have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty large range of motion. Front headroom doesn't really appear to be too affected by the C40 conversion. It does appear to be just a tiny bit lower depending on the spec you're looking at, but sitting here comfortably, I still have about 4 inches of headroom left, so the front section is definitely suitable for taller drivers. Logically, thanks to the sexier profile, rear seat headroom does drop a little bit versus the XC60, but it's actually pretty decent for a modern EV thanks to the boxier proportions that we still find in the C40. If I sit very upright, my head touches the ceiling, but if I'm in a more relaxed position where my head is not right against the headrest, then my hair is just brushing the ceiling. There's also a reasonable amount of legroom. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks. I have about 1.5 inches left. Thanks to the design of the battery pack, we also have pretty decently sized footwells. This is not a complete skateboard battery, but a skateboard with cutouts for the rear seat passenger footwells. Through the tunnel there's some electronic cables, etc. Then we have the other cutout right there. Then to help improve packaging efficiency, the batteries are double stacked under the rear seats. Out on the road, the C40 is serious fun. 0 to 60 in this model happened in 4.2 seconds. That easily makes this the fastest Volvo that I have ever driven. But because Volvo decided to put identical motors up front and in the back, this doesn't feel quite the same as other EVs that are right around 4 seconds 0 to 60. Something like a Mach-E, it definitely has a strong rear power bias. Oddly enough, so does the Ioniq, the EV6, the Genesis GV60 as well. This, on the other hand, feels very, very planted. The big reason that some performance EVs put a smaller motor in the front is that sometimes you can get a bit of torque steer, and that is something that you'll notice in the C40. There's just a lot of power going on up front, a lot of torque, and that's necessary to get this 0 to 60 in that near 4-second time. As you can see on your screen, the C40 is no lightweight, so handling is definitely going to be a notch below some of the lighter performance EVs with stickier tires. This is not a direct competitor to the Porsche Taycan, although it is definitely a significant amount of fun. And obviously, if you wanted to take handling to the next level, you could swap out these all-season tires with summer tires, and I'm really glad that Volvo gave us wheels back there that accommodate 255 width tires right from the factory. You'll also notice the curb weight in aggressive braking maneuvers. If I really romp on the brake pedal there, this definitely has trouble stopping as quickly as you might want. That again could be improved with the tires. And the tires really are the limit there. The brakes, no problem grabbing onto them, and because of course so much braking is done by regen, brake pad life should be pretty good as well. An interesting thing to note on the C40 is that Volvo is still not giving us much ability to control throttle liftoff regen. We can either have one pedal braking mode on, or we can have one pedal braking mode off. In one pedal mode, it will slow you down to a complete stop, and the regen is fairly aggressive there. If I'm not in the one pedal driving mode, however, Volvo has opted for very little throttle liftoff regen. That is more efficient than aggressive throttle liftoff regen, although the difference is fairly minor. Remember that when you regenerate power back into a battery, you're not going to get as much back as it took to get you up to 60, for instance. The most efficient thing, of course, is to not accelerate unless you actually need to, and then coast as gradually as possible to your destination, and of course brake as slowly as possible even if you're using the regen braking. But again, if you want more aggressive throttle liftoff regen, there is that one pedal drive mode. I would just have loved to have seen paddles on the back of the steering wheel so you could adjust the regen braking, or perhaps having this little shifter here toggle side to side, something like that, like we've seen in other Volvos, to again be able to adjust the amount of regen that you get. Thanks to the lower ride height, which also gives us a lower center of gravity, this definitely feels more planted and sportier than the XC40 Recharge, and this is a ton of fun. Volvo gave this fairly wide tires, which is something that we typically see in luxury EVs, and that is going to be one big differentiator between this and the mid-level trims of the Mustang Mach-E. Well, actually, to be honest, even the Mustang Mach-E GT, because it uses 245 width tires all the way around. This one has 235s front, 255s in the rear, but the average Mach-E, those are just 225 width tires, and they're not terribly grippy. So even though this has higher ground clearance than we find in the Mustang, this is more fun to drive out on your favorite winding mountain road. Compared to the Mach-E, this still has a decent amount of curb weight and the center of gravity is considerably higher, but I think this has a slightly better feel in terms of handling out on the road. Range is a little tricky to talk about since I haven't had this at home, but I suspect that the EPA range is certainly achievable, just as we've seen in the Polestar and the XC40. Volvo has chosen to be pretty conservative about their EPA range estimates. They have likely elected a voluntary derating on this vehicle as well, in order to make sure that that number is real-world achievable. And this vehicle has a heat pump, which really helps reduce electricity consumption in colder weather. Heat pumps are always going to be more efficient than a resistive element heater. They're always going to be more than 100% efficient, unless we're talking about a heat pump on the surface of Pluto or something like that. But even at below freezing temperatures and 0-degree Fahrenheit temperatures, heat pumps are still more efficient. If you're worried about extreme cold weather performance, Volvo does include an auxiliary electric cabin heater. So in really cold climates, don't worry, this is not going to have the same sort of problem that you may have seen in a few EVs out there that simply have a heat pump. They don't have a backup heating method. But according to Volvo, even at sub-zero temperatures, it's not really using that auxiliary heater element for very much. The C40 is unquestionably the most dynamic electrified vehicle that Volvo has ever built, but I wouldn't exactly say that this turns over a new leaf in terms of driving dynamics. In terms of steering feel and suspension tune, this definitely feels like a Volvo, and I think that's a good thing because Volvo strikes a pretty good balance between handling ambitions, ride quality, daily driver livability, etc. When it comes to suspension tuning, a lot of EV manufacturers have decided to really imitate the way that Tesla has tuned their suspensions. And if you're after a vehicle that has excellent handling, very little body roll, very little tip and dive, then the Model 3 or the Model Y are going to be excellent options for you. But this tune, I think, is more desirable and more livable because it's simply more comfortable. For 2022, Volvo has priced the C40 right in the middle of things for a luxury crossover like this. It starts at $58,750, and basically it ends at $58,750 as well, because it only comes in the one trim that you're looking at right here, the Ultimate trim. That makes it about $7,000 less expensive than the least expensive XC40, but only $600 more expensive than the comparably equipped XC40. This is going to be significantly less expensive for most buyers versus a Tesla Model Y, because the Model Y not only doesn't have a $7,500 tax credit anymore, it has seen some very significant price increases over the last year. And that means that for most shoppers, it's going to be well more than $10,000 more expensive than this. It is, however, going to give you longer range and faster charging. Depending on your driving style, the real-world range difference between the Volvo and the Tesla may be smaller than the numbers would otherwise indicate, but it is still going to get you further on a charge. Also further on a charge would be something like the Kia EV6, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, and the Ford Mustang Mach-E. They're not luxury branded vehicles, so in many ways they're not the direct competitor to the Volvo C40, but they are in a very similar price range. You can get the EV6 up to about $60,000. It also has a tax credit. Very similar thing over there on the Ioniq 5. The Ioniq 5 definitely is bigger and boxier in a lot of dimensions, but it's not necessarily going to get you that much further on a charge. With all-wheel drive, it's going to be slower than this, definitely slower than this, and it's going to get you about 260 miles on a charge. This is 226, about 230. So for most shoppers, 20 miles difference is not going to make a huge difference. What is going to make a big difference for the Hyundai, Kia, and the upcoming Genesis EVs is going to be the fast charge rate. They charge seriously quickly, about 260 kW, 18 minutes to go from 10% to 80%, and then all the way up to 100% is still blazing fast in those vehicles. How long will the battery last as a result of that really fast DC fast charge time? We just don't know. This could last longer as a result of that. We just don't have the data at this point. Also, a logical direct competitor, and perhaps the most direct competitor in many ways to this, will be the upcoming Genesis GV60. It is the first full electric vehicle from Genesis, And style-wise, I think this looks prettier. The Genesis GV60 looks sort of like an overinflated, rounded-off Genesis, and I think Volvo did a good job making this look like a Volvo, but also futuristic. Price-wise, we just don't know anything about the GV60 yet, but a lot of predictions put it right around $55,000 starting. It's likely going to be less than this starting, but we do know it's going to start as a rear-wheel drive vehicle. All-wheel drive will be optional, and if you want the high-horsepower all-wheel drive system that's over 400 horsepower with performance basically the same or similar to this, that's going to be even more expensive. So I would not be surprised if the GV60 ended up being several $1,000s more than the Volvo. My guess is that for similar performance, it's probably going to be up there around $65,000 or $66,000. Because again, you can already get the Kia up to about $60,000. Now, the Genesis GV60 is going to give you the faster DC fast charge times from the rest of the eGMP platform vehicles. Again, 260 kW versus 150 in this one. And it's probably going to give you longer range as well, because that model has been very, very efficient in both the Hyundai and the Kia EV already. The elephant in the room, of course, is the closely related Polestar 2. It starts at $49,900 if you want the all-wheel drive version, so definitely less expensive than this and less expensive than the XC40. Any way you shop, of course, Volvo's probably going to be happy because Volvo owns half of Polestar. But the big difference is really just the personality. This drives like an electric Volvo. It is definitely quick, but it's tuned a little bit softer, a little bit more comfortable. The way the steering feel is tuned is more typical for Volvo shoppers, etc. And the Polestar 2 really reminds me what would happen if BMW was tasked with building a Volvo. It is fast, but it feels very Germanic. Now, it's not a bad thing. That's a good thing if you're interested in driving dynamics. It is the more dynamic option. But if you're looking for something that's more comfortable, more daily driver livable, I would probably get the C40. And I have to say, I love the look. Be sure to sound off in the comment section if you were looking to spend $58,000 to $60,000, what would you be shopping for? At 4.3 seconds to 4.2 seconds, 0 to 60, this is not as fast as a Mach-E GT, but it is in a similar price range. This is faster than the EV6, faster than the Ioniq 5, oddly, in a very similar price range as well. Obviously, a Tesla Model Y has to be in the mix, even though it's going to be more expensive, because not everybody qualifies for the full tax credit, although I would remind you that the vast majority of EV shoppers most certainly do. And I think I like the look of this better than any of the ones that I have described so far. It's not trying to be anything other than a sexy Volvo EV, and that's just fine by me. The Mustang is definitely trying to look like a Mustang, the EV6 looked very futuristic, etc., and I like the more restrained and elegant styling on this model. I suspect that the big hiccup for many of you is the same one that I am concerned about, and that is the range figure. I honestly could accept the slower DC fast charge rate if this had 300 miles of range. That would have made it obviously heavier, and it wouldn't have performed as well, and it would have been more expensive, etc. But I really wish Volvo would give us the option, at least, of having a bigger battery in the XC40 and C40. Now, theoretically, if you want a longer range EV from Volvo, and a more efficient EV from Volvo, and a bigger EV from Volvo, all of that is coming very, very soon, because we're going to get a sort of replacement for the XC90 very, very soon, sometime later this year, and it sounds like it's going to have a full battery electric version right from the very beginning. And then followed very shortly after that, we're going to get a whole range of full electric Volvos, because they're going to go from 2 electric Volvos to everything being electric over the next 8 years or so. So chop chop. Not a lot of time left to bring out all of those models. They have a decent amount of vehicles to completely redesign and replace with full electrics. But I really like the direction they're going with this new C40. Again, let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section, and I will see all of you later.